Please join me in welcoming David Sheen.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for caring enough about the part of the world that I'm coming from to come out here in the middle of your days and hear my report about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. The reason why I'm calling this slideshow presentation Israel and Palestine in the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age refers to a time in American history when on the face of it, it seemed as if everything was just groovy, everything was grand and golden. But if you just peer past the facade, there were a lot of problems in society. And I claim that that's the situation in Israel and Palestine right now. For example, if you speak to Israeli folks, you'll find that they report very high levels of happiness, satisfaction with their lives. Some of the highest satisfaction levels in the world, in fact. But all is not as it seems. And when problems come up, you'll say, well, you know, if there's problems you speak of, David, then why don't we hear of these? You know, why aren't they dealt with? And the thing is that I would argue that Israel has a release valve, that when there are problems that come up, that they can always be, where am I going next? Anyone? Big bucks, no whammies. Stop, blame the Arabs. That's the name of the game. So anytime that there's a problem that comes up in society, it can be blamed on Arab folk. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So what are causes of death in Israel? You know, we think of Israel in our imagination as a place of war and a place of terrorism, and certainly that is the case, but it's somewhat magnified in our perception. In reality, causes of death in Israel are similar to most Western countries, various diseases. You have to go down to the 70th or 80th cause of death to get to, death because of war, death because of terrorism. In fact, it's much greater chance of dying in a car accident in Israel than being the victim of a terrorist attack or a military attack. But even that, if you can imagine, even that, the Israeli official that is in charge of reducing traffic deaths, okay, what does he have to say about the cause for traffic deaths? He says, the problem is not the infrastructure, but rather the wild driving in Arab society. Now, I don't know if you've been following the news, but in the last few months, Israel actually was struck with a series of wildfires. They spread across the country and they caused a lot of damage, not only in forested areas, but some of these fires also spread to inhabited areas, cities, and some people had to be evacuated from their homes. This is a great tragedy, of course. Now, what was the reason for these wildfires? According to NASA, in their words, Earth's 2016 surface temperatures were the warmest since modern record-keeping began. This is according to NASA. And that's the year 2016. When we talk about that very week that the wildfires broke out, we look at the map and we find that across the Middle East and North Africa, across the whole Mediterranean, there were fires in practically every single country, all across the region. Okay? So that week was one of the highest, the most driest of the entire year, which was the hottest on record. And let's be honest, there's also another reason scientists say why there were so many wildfires that broke out, and that's because Israel is covered in pine trees. Now, pine trees are especially easy to burn, and the reason why Israel is covered in pine, because pine trees are not native to Israel. There's no natural reason for them to be there, but it has to be said that when the Israeli army ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages in 1948 and 1967, what it often did was, in order to cover up the evidence of these villages that had once been in existence and had been ethnically cleansed, they planted pine trees in order to hide what had happened. And so because of this, there's a proliferation of pine trees across the country, and those trees ignite extremely easily. So a combination of those factors, according to scientists, were the reason for these fires. Talking to the police themselves and to the fire services themselves, they said there's no way to prove that any of these fires were the result of arson. But according to Netanyahu, he says, we are facing arson terrorism. Once again, blame the Arabs. So, again, what's another problem facing Israeli society that you never really hear about? Poverty. If you can imagine this, because we think about Israel as this economic superpower, regional superpower, at the very least, this high-tech marvel, right? So we imagine it as having a very powerful economy, but in actuality, while that may be true, there is still the highest poverty rate of all developed countries. Taking North America, US, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Israel has the highest poverty rate. Okay, it's actually almost double the OECD average, if you can imagine that. Now, it's not just the average, we're also talking about the most vulnerable members of society, children. Israel also has the highest child poverty rate of all developed countries. Okay? And so what does Netanyahu do about this? What is his response to the poverty that's endemic in Israeli society, the differences between rich and poor? Well, he says, if we take away the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs, our situation is excellent. In other words, it's because of these Arabs that we have poverty rates. If it wasn't for the Arabs, we wouldn't have poverty. Okay, blame the Arabs, we get it. I understand what you're trying to get at here. The problem is this also extends not just to general society, not only to children, but also to the elderly. And it's incredibly shameful, in my humble opinion. We see a situation where, on top of all those other stats I've already shown you, Israel has the highest elderly poverty rate of all the OECD countries, of all the developed countries. Elderly folk are getting a very, very small stipend, Social Security. It's quite embarrassing, actually. And so there was an effort this year to pass a law that would raise the funds that elderly Israelis are entitled to. Sad to report, however, that the government voted down this legislation to not bump up their Social Security, and the person who cast the vote that ended up quashing the resolution to raise elderly Social Security rate was actually Gila Gamliel, the minister responsible for the welfare of elderly people. She voted down the legislation, so it didn't pass. It's sad that this is the case. And it's even sadder when the very people that we imagine that are, that the state exists, if not for them, then for who? Holocaust survivors. Every single year around Holocaust Remembrance Day, we are treated to another series of newspaper articles where we are told that 1/3 of Holocaust survivors in Israel live below the poverty line. It's an incredible source of shame, and yet, despite this as a fact, and people, you actually have Holocaust survivors protesting this in Israel. Shoah v'chilpa, Holocaust in shame. It's shameful that they should have to do this. Because tomorrow will be too late, they write on their signs. And so what's Netanyahu's response? He turns his back on them. He doesn't do anything to help their plight. And so year after year after year, this is the same situation over and over again. Thankfully, this year there was a change. I'm happy to report there was a legislative effort to actually increase the amount of money that Holocaust survivors are entitled to. So finally we have a change in the situation. But give credit where credit is due. It wasn't Netanyahu, it wasn't his government, it was the Palestinian party in the Knesset who actually passed that law to increase the benefits granted to Holocaust survivors. While this is happening, the Knesset itself, Israel's parliament, did a study, and it found that actually Israel's parliamentarians, its lawmakers, actually have the highest salaries compared to other members of parliament in other countries, statistically, both when you compare that to the average full-time salary of Israeli citizen, and also when you take into account the GDP by country. So Israeli parliamentarians are very well paid proportionately compared to other countries, including the USA. Despite this, we see that that's not enough for Netanyahu. And if you look in the Israeli media, you'll find that he is currently being investigated on a whole host of investigations for corruption. It's like the man got an MBA from Harvard, yet he claims till this day he doesn't know how to use a credit card. He refuses to pay for anything himself, but he's happy to, secure funds from this direction and that direction. Just Just today, Trump called Netanyahu. He made a call to him. He wanted to talk to him. But at that moment, Netanyahu couldn't easily take the call because he was being questioned by the police yet again for more corruption charges. So he actually had to ask the police, hold on a second, I have to have a few words with the President of the United States. I mean, this is ongoing. This has gone on and on and on. It goes deeper and deeper. And it gets to the point where, if you can imagine this, the ruling party, Netanyahu's party itself, is now taking him to court because the finances of the party are so opaque and they don't know what's going on, and so they want to open it up and see what's actually happening with party funds and make it more transparent, and Netanyahu is resisting it. So actually the comptroller of the Likud party is taking Netanyahu to court over this. This is the extent of the corruption in Israeli society. Now, a couple years ago I did a series of talks called Inside Israel's Race Wars. Exactly 2 years ago, on college campuses throughout the United States and Canada. And at that point I explained that in the months and years just previous to that talk, all 12 of these Israeli mayors had been either investigated or charged or convicted of corruption. Just in the previous couple of years, all 12 of these mayors. That was 2 years ago. Since that time, since I gave that tour, that lecture, I'm afraid to admit that the list goes on and on. Since that time, just since March 2015, since March 2015, the last 2 years, the list of mayors that have been, again, investigated, charged, and convicted of corruption crimes, this mayor, this mayor, this mayor, this mayor, this, and this mayor. Just in the last 2 years. This is an incomplete list, okay? It also includes this mayor, and this mayor, and this mayor. And the only reason why I've separated them, because what links the three of those, as well as this mayor, is that in addition to corruption charges, they're also being investigated and or charged and or convicted of sex crimes. And now we get on to the other major problem plaguing Israeli society that we never seem to hear about, which is rape culture. And it runs deep. And it's not only the mayors, it's also the members of Knesset. Just in the last couple of years, again, and we've had, last couple of years, in the last year, we're talking about this member of Knesset, this member of Knesset, this member of Knesset, this member of Knesset. And it's not only in the political realm, it's also in general society, talking about CEOs of major Israeli companies, talking about deans of Israeli universities, talking about the Prime Minister's office himself. Right around Netanyahu, we're talking about his driver, convicted of raping no small amount of young girls. Talking about his spokesperson, accused of rape. Talking about 2 of his chiefs of staff, accused of sex crimes. And what happens? So there's a slight amount of embarrassment. You know, it's kind of embarrassing to keep working for Netanyahu when you've been accused of serious sex crimes. So they bow out quietly. And then in no time, Netanyahu's rehired them and appointed them to other posts. And then again, the same person, Gil Shefer, is again accused of more sex crimes against other women. So this is the situation where the message from the top is, it's all good. Women's bodies are yours for the taking if you're powerful enough. Even when you're at the very pinnacle of power. Israeli President Moshe Katsav, convicted rapist, served time in jail. Once he's released from jail, he comes home to his hometown and he's feted with street party and people are, greeting him with great joy. It's like, where's the social stigma? Well, courts decided that despite the fact that he was not remorseful, despite the fact that he continued to try to shame these women that he'd attacked, okay? Still, they said, okay, we're going to let you off early. We're going to shorten your jail sentence and allow you to go home that very same day that they did so. The courts also decided not to shorten the sentence of this man who had been raped repeatedly. And finally, after being raped several times and on another rape attempt, he then killed his rapist. Okay? And he did express remorse for that. But though he did express remorse, For killing the person who had raped him already several times, the courts refused to reduce his 20-year sentence. Okay, so rapists, it's all good. Get raped, sorry, we can't help you. Now, yeah, I will admit, and I'm happy to admit, that in the last year we have the highest proportion of parliamentarians that are women, more than ever before. It's not where we need to be. Today, about 25% of the Knesset are women. Okay, of the 120 members of the Knesset, approximately 30 of them are female. That's good. That's more. It's not nearly where it needs to be. It needs to be double that, but it's better than we've seen up until now. Great. Unfortunately, almost all of those women report that they have been sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, and a couple of them saying that's even happened while they've been members of Knesset. Okay? So this problem is endemic in Israeli society. What are the police doing about it? What are we doing to stop it? I'm sad to say, in the last few years alone, how many top cops, now, hold on a second, let me just scale that back. When I say top cops, I'm talking about either the commander of the police of an entire Israeli city, or the commander of the national police force for an entire division, like the drug division or the corruption division or whatever. So top cops, just in the last couple of years, top Israeli police commanders who have been, again, either investigated or charged or convicted of sex crimes. This top cop, this top cop, this top cop, this top cop, this top cop. It's an incomplete list, all of these. Okay? Now, keep in mind, what do they have to say for themselves? Instead of combating the rape epidemic, they're contributing to it. And what do they say in response? So they use the cranberry defense. This is what I call it. I'm not talking about the fruit, the cranberry. I'm talking about the Irish rock band, the Cranberries. I don't know if any of you remember them. Their first album, their debut album, was called Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We? And that's essentially the defense that we hear from these top cops. So we have Niso Shacham, who was the commander of police of Jerusalem. And when it came to court, and he was being charged with these sex crimes, what he said in his defense was that his actions were in keeping with the conventional norms accepted by the police, routine and common. In other words, why are you getting mad at me? What I did, everyone was doing it. Why should I be singled out? Why should I be punished for something that everyone was doing? Okay, that's the chief of police of Jerusalem. Now, of course, when we go to the Israeli political sphere, right, then there's a different narrative. What do we do when we have a problem in Israeli society? You guys already know, I've already blame the Arabs, right? So again, rape it's not a problem that we need to deal with. It can be blamed on the Arabs. How does this work? So in the Knesset, just a couple months ago, I was sitting in a Knesset session, and this right-wing legislator, Oded Forel, comes in and he says that the rape culture in Israel, it's about Palestinians raping Jews. There's a plague of rape being perpetrated by Palestinians on Jewish women. It's just like there's military attacks, Arab on Jew. So there is a wave of Palestinians raping Jewish women in order to attack Jews, in order to harm Jews. This is the narrative that he's trying to put forward. And he says that these are a terror attack in every possible way. He says they're a crime against humanity. Blame the Arabs. Well, the only problem is the police were at the same Knesset session, and the police commander who is in charge of sex crime division, Ayelet Ornstein, she said herself, we examined the data, and the total sex crimes in the mixed cities is decreasing. And furthermore, she said, and when we focus on the sex crimes which were committed by non-Jews, there is a pattern of decrease. Okay? Again, the police are saying, yeah, that's right. Everyone else is doing it. It's not just Arabs. Everyone is doing it. But to the right-wing legislators, it's blame the Arabs. And this, now we get to what is a sad and sick aspect of Israeli society, which is the war on miscegenation. Blaming rape on race mixing. Blaming rape on race. This is how it goes down. And it's not only the right-wing backbenchers who do this, it's even Netanyahu himself. So a few months ago, this man, Palestinian man, was accused of rape, came out. They said that he brutally raped an Israeli woman, and so it was reported on, and he was arrested, and people were scandalized by the story. And now, finally, we hadn't heard anything from Netanyahu for years and years of this rape epidemic. Finally, he comes out with a statement saying, "Where were you all this time? Why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you doing anything about this? Look at this, at Palestinian on Jew crimes and rape crimes. Where is everyone? Why aren't you doing anything about it?" Well, in response to that, one feminist legislator, former head of the opposition, was disgusted. YACHIMOVICH, she said to him, "Be ashamed, Prime Minister. Zero empathy for rape victims until there was a window of opportunity to incite. All those years, you did nothing about this rape epidemic. It's only when you thought you could blame it on Palestinians that you come out with a statement." Well, sure enough, within a few days' time, the police spoke and said that no. In fact, it was consensual sex that had gone on. No rape had occurred. What had happened was, once the woman's parents learned that their daughter had had sex with a Palestinian man, they were so outraged and disgusted by this that to cover up, they said, "Okay, no, we're going to tell the police that it was rape. We're going to accuse this man of rape." And this way they could, hide their shame behind the man. And they knew, frankly, that there's so much racism against Palestinian folk, and there's so much anti-miscegenation sentiment that they could get away with it. Of course, after a few days came out, nothing of the sort had occurred. But this anti-miscegenation movement, this anti-race mixing movement, is government funded. Okay, there's multiple ministries in the Israeli government who fund groups like this group, among others, who actually, if you can imagine this, religious groups who come mainly from the West Bank settlements, colonize cities in Israel, those few cities where you actually have Jews and Arabs living together, not just Jews or just Arabs, but those few cities where they actually live beside one another. So you have the government funding groups to move from Jewish-only settlements in the West Bank to come to mixed cities like Jaffa, and this is their their leaflets that they hand out. In Jaffa, there are mixed marriages in almost every building. We must stop the miscegenation. This is where my tax money goes to. Are you getting this? And those are the officially government-funded groups, right? Then there's groups like Lehava that once did receive government funding. Do they still receive government funding? We're not sure. It's opaque, but we're going to work on the assumption whether they do or not. We don't know. But these are not just groups who go into town and try to convince people to break up romantic relationships between Jews and Arabs. We're talking about actually attacking mixed groups, physically attacking mixed couples, okay? And attacking it with the extensive objective of driving non-Jewish people out of the area, to ethnically cleanse them. So there's no possibility of mixing with one another. So Lehava, it used to receive government funding. Whether it does now or not, we aren't clear on it, but we know that its main funder, okay, this man, isn't a marginal figure. This is the patriarch of the Falek family, Simon Falek, an American citizen. And we see he is not some random figure. Here he is sharing a dais with none other than Shimon Peres, the former prime minister and president of Israel. Okay? Now, today, Simon Falek is also, the Falek family are also the #1 funders of Benjamin Netanyahu's election campaigns. Okay? In addition, we see him here with this man. You may recognize him as David Friedman, who is Donald Trump's ambassador to Israel. These are the kinds of people that are funding the anti-miscegenation movement in Israel. Now, when I say miscegenation, some of you may be looking at me like, what are you even talking about? Thankfully, I'm horrified at the prospect that this may actually be returning to the US, but at least in recent history, hopefully you have to go back decades to even understand the framework that I'm referring to. This is a photograph of Emmett Till. In 1955, this Chicago teenager, black teenager, went down to Mississippi and he was lynched by white folk, and ostensibly the reason for this was because he had spoken to a white woman. He had flirted with a white woman, they claimed. Now, this just came back into the news because that woman, she must be in her 80s now, but it just came out. She admits that she actually manufactured the whole allegation, that he'd never even flirted with her, he'd never even spoken to her, whistled at her, nothing. They made it all up to justify. Of course, nothing justifies it. Even if he had whistled or flirted, that nothing justifies his murder. But turns out it was all made up. In any case, this is what happened. A young black man from Chicago, teenager, goes down and is lynched by white folk. Why? Because supposedly he spoke to a white woman. That's 1955. In Israel, it just happened. Okay? Just like that happened to a Chicago teen. Well, in Chicago's Israeli sister city, Petah Tikva, okay, this black man was walking right outside City Hall in November. And he walked and he saw a group of 3 Israeli teenage girls. He spoke to them. They exchanged a couple words. 10 seconds later, and they're standing like behind a bench, right? Standing this far, 6, 7, 8 feet away. 10 seconds of conversation, he walks away. 10 seconds of conversation. That was enough for their friends to determine that he deserved to die. They pounced on him right in front of City Hall. And it was all filmed, of course, because there's CCTV cameras there in front of City Hall. And they filmed him beating the man to death for an hour and a half. You know, it got so bad that just like Emmett Till, I'm not going to show you what Emmett Till looked like at the end of the beating, but if you've ever seen the historic photos, his face was mauled so badly it was unrecognizable. Forget as Emmett Till, as a human it was unrecognizable. It was a sack of mush. And that's what they did to Babakir, to this African refugee, to this black man in Chicago's sister city. They beat him so badly that his own brother could not recognize him. The only reason that that his brother was able to recognize his body was because he was a refugee from Darfur, and in the fighting, he had lost some of his fingers. And so his brother was able to make out that it was his brother's body because he lacked some fingers. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to tell because these Israeli teenagers beat him so badly till he was unrecognizable. So what happens in response to this? Does the mayor of Petah Tikva, is he shocked? Is he scandalized? Does he say, oh my goodness, we got to do something about this race hate. We got to combat this rampant racism. We need to protect black folk. No, just the opposite. He declares, Yitzhak Braverman, the mayor of Petah Tikva, declares that he's going to drive all the Africans out of his city. And sure enough, this is what he starts to do. He sends in his inspectors. He tells the electricity company and the water company to shut off services to apartments where black people live. And they do this. And so you have black people now having to take a bus 45 minutes to the Mediterranean Sea in order to bathe. Okay? His mission, you're a mother. You need to cook for your kids. You want to bathe your babies. But no, they don't deserve water. They don't deserve electricity. They don't deserve basic human rights. They need to be driven out, according to Yitzhak Braverman. Now, some of his constituents were asking him about this. Okay, that's nice that you're cutting off their power, cutting off their water. That's not quick enough. We want them gone today. We want these blacks ethnically cleansed from Petah Tikva. He's trying to explain to them, it doesn't work that way. He tells them, this is all recorded. Right? It was all recorded with an audio recording. He says, look, most of them, these African refugees, are here legally, and they do no harm. Their share of Petah Tikva's crime is small. There's no reason to crack down on them. There's no reason to evict them or expel them from town. So then what's the problem? You walk through Founders Square, you see blacks drinking beer. It's not nice. So the problem is you don't want to have to look at black people. You don't want to see them in your line of vision. That's their crime. Existence. So then he explains, we can't just, I know you want to kick them all out yesterday, but understand how complicated it is. You have to find exactly those that broke the law. Yes, we'd like to just round them all up willy-nilly, but unfortunately, the law, we have to, on the surface of it, we have to look legal, so we can only round up those that broke the law. Trying to, instead of explain to his racist constituents that no, it's wrong to target them, it's wrong to stigmatize them, but he's just trying to mollify them, saying, yes, I get you, we want to kick them all out in time, it'll take a little while longer than you want. I wonder if we're going to hear any comments from Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago. Is this a shared value? Are these the shared values between Petah Tikva and Chicago? And if not, can I hear you say something about it? אולי אתה רוצה להגיד משהו בעברית? אולי הפעם הבאה שאתה נפגש עם ביבי, אולי יש לך מה להגיד? Maybe next time you meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, you'll have something to say about that. And I'm sad to say this was not the first time that a black man was lynched in Israel for being a black man, and it probably won't be the last time. A year earlier, this man, the previous refugee we spoke of, was from Sudan, this one's from Eritrea. So he's in Beersheba Central Bus Station. And at that time, sadly, there was a terrorist attack. A Palestinian militant came and took out a submachine gun and started spraying. A couple people died and several people were injured. And while this terror attack is going, obviously all the other people in the crowded bus station were running in every direction, trying to flee, trying to get away from the gunfire. And he himself was one of them. People are running. He's crawling on the ground, trying to avoid the gunfire. And as he's crawling, now I'm sorry to say I look away because what I'm about to show you is sickening and can't be taken back. But yes, this man was actually lynched, beaten to death by a mob of Israelis. Because as he was trying to escape, and again, it's all recorded on CCTV video cameras, okay? He's crawling away as the gunfire is spreading around the room, and as the security guard comes up and shoots him. Why? He's crawling away. He's not a terrorist, but he's black. And sure enough, it's not enough that he was shot lying in a pool of his own blood, because then other people start getting in on the action. They realize they can take their anger out on him. And so this man throws a chair on him, lying on the ground. And then these two men, they pick up a big bench and they slam it on him. And then this man comes and kicks him, and this man comes and kicks him, and this man comes and kicks him, and on and on and on and on and on. And when paramedics come to treat him, they're said, no. You don't treat him, treat other people, don't treat him. And they delayed and delayed and delayed, and his evacuation to the point where he died, he bled out. And this is Israel today. This is the reality on the ground for black folks. Now, those men, those prison guards who took that big bench and slammed it down on him, because it was caught on CCTV video camera, I guess no choice, they had to have some semblance of a court case. When he was asked about what he'd done, he said, I have nothing to be regretful for. If it happened again, once, twice, 20 times, I would act exactly the same 20 times. Now, as I said, got to court, and the judge decided to exonerate them for their crimes. The judge said that they had acted in a way that is expected of a prison guard, to contribute to the positive image of the prison service. Now, what I'm trying to explain to you is that if 5 years ago, when I first started talking about Israel's war on Africans, there was an effort to cover it up. There was a sense of shame around it. They didn't want the world to know. But nowadays, it's just the opposite. Netanyahu realizes that he can actually turn it into political capital. He boasts about it, in fact. He's advertising this fact in a series of tweets. He writes, a strong Israel prevents the passage of masses of refugees to Europe. He writes after Trump announces that he's going to build his wall. He says, President Trump is right. I built a wall along Israel's southern border. It stopped all illegal immigration. Great success. Great idea. Now, in Israel, Netanyahu is not only building a wall to prevent other Africans from entering the country, he's also trying to round all those Africans that already exist in the country into camps. And sickeningly, the attacks on Africans aren't confined to African adults. We're talking about now acts on African children, African babies. When you look at these photos, any baby, definitely these cute babies, how could you possibly have any hate in your heart towards them? But as we heard earlier in the introduction, there's a hatred of African babies just as there's a hatred of Palestinian babies. They represent a demographic threat. And so we have Israelis walking through downtown liberal Tel Aviv with condoms. And they walk up to areas of Tel Aviv in which African people live. And they walk up to African folks and they try to hand them condoms. They try to give them condoms and convince them to use it. We don't want you to have kids. We don't want you here, and we don't want your progeny here. We want you gone, and we won't want you to recreate yourself, all right? We don't want African folks here. Now, they're not ashamed about it. They're photographing themselves and uploading these pictures to Facebook, okay? This is the attitude towards African babies in Tel Aviv. And it's not confined only to these. And it's not only, again, I reiterate, this is African babies we're talking about. And sadly, it's not only the non-Jewish African babies, it's also the Jewish African babies that are under attack. A few months ago, this man's like a circumciser to the stars or something like that. It's a mohel, a man who does ritual circumcision, and he performs his circumcisions he boasts about, circumcising the grandchildren of members of Knesset and ministers of the government and the president himself. And so this man, he was approached by another Israeli saying, I want to learn the tricks of the trade. I want to apprentice with you. Of course, this man was not a would-be circumciser. He was actually an undercover journalist, an investigative journalist who pretended to be a wannabe apprentice, and the man took him on. For a fee, I will train you to be a circumciser. Now, of course, according to Israeli regulations, you can't just do this willy-nilly. You've got to work with someone who's an established professional. You've got to go to dozens. You've got to witness. You've got to be right there for dozens of circumcisions, witnessing them, monitoring them, observing them, before you could even touch a knife. Okay? But this man, the circumciser to the star, says, no, don't worry about that. Just pay me the fee. It's enough. From the first day, I'll just explain. Here, chick-chack, this is all you got to do. You can already get started. How could you possibly do this? People would be up in arms. No. We don't go to Jews. We just go to the blacks. We go to the blacks, the black Jews, the black non-Jews. And these are quotes, because the man had a video camera, a secret video camera, and he filmed the rabbi explaining to him why he can cut babies without any training whatsoever. There are the regular Ethiopians, and that's the Jewish Africans, and the Sudanese, that's the non-Jewish Africans. They're worse. They're black like the N-word. Learning from them is the best. Why does everyone do it to non-Jewish babies? You can make 100 errors. We fix it. I have needle and thread. First learn here on the non-Jewish babies, and then we'll be able to do it cleanly to Jews. Even if you make mistakes, you can fix them. They don't even understand what a mistake is. They're cannon fodder. Whatever you do, no problem. Even if you cut crooked, they won't say anything because they don't understand anything. This is the discourse in Israel around black folks. This is the level of anti-blackness. Now, this wasn't a surprise to black Jews, to Ethiopian Jews, because for several years already they've known that the Israeli government implemented a policy of requiring their mothers to take long-term birth control injections as a precondition for being allowed to move to Israel. No other Jewish person from Russia or from America or any other part of the world was required to do this, but they don't want black babies. So they required black women to undergo this, birth control in order to have the right to move to Israel. And that's why in recent years you have Ethiopian Israelis taking to the streets, protesting state-sponsored racism against them. In the last few months, we even have hundreds of African Israelis, Ethiopian Jews, saying, we're not going to serve in the army anymore. We refuse. Because of state-sponsored racism towards us, we are refusing to serve in the army. We're refusing to do reserve duty. Now, notice, they're not saying, we refuse to serve in the Israeli army because the Israeli army, violates the human rights of Palestinian people. They're saying because the Israeli government acts with racism towards our community, that's why we're not going to serve. And the reason why this stands out so much is because it's so rare. It's rare for Jewish Israelis to refuse to serve in the Israeli army. And yet, despite the fact that it's so rare, you still haven't heard about it. How could you not have heard that hundreds of black Jews are refusing to serve? But this is the situation. Despite its rarity, despite its exceptionality, you won't hear about it. The media will never report it. And so, we don't have a situation where, of course, a few here, a few there. There's always exceptions that prove the rule. But in a general rule, Jewish Israelis continue to serve in the Israeli army. Essentially, what you have is this phenomenon called shooting and crying. That's what we call it in Israel. And this is a perfect example of it. Just this past year, we have this famous Israeli actor, Lior Ashkenazi, who does like a tell-all interview in an Israeli newspaper explaining, it's not about while perpetrating these crimes, feeling bad and complaining to the army. It's years later, after the fact, I'm going to break my silence. Only, long into the future, I'm feeling regretful about what happened, so I'm opening up, I'm opening my soul up and I'm explaining what I did all those years ago. So Lior Ashkenazi gives an interview and he explains what he used to do when he was in the Israeli army. We'd throw stun grenades into a family home for the hell of it, for fun. Or tear gas, also for the hell of it. We'd shoot hot water tanks during a curfew for the hell of it, so they won't have hot water. Beat a man to death, that kind of stuff. Now, we now have a situation where not only is that normalized, not only is that just part of the parlance, but someone who executes a Palestinian even on camera, even in real time, becomes a national hero. So we have this situation, Elor Azaria is the name of this, and it happens all the time, it happens again and again, and the only reason we know about this is because it was filmed, okay? He executed a Palestinian man lying on the ground who posed no threat to anyone at that point, but he did it. He thought he'd get away with it, and it's only because this other Palestinian man who filmed it with a video camera that we even know. Under ordinary circumstances, we should have seen him being praised and being honored, an honorific Man of the Year. Now, it's as if he was honored with that title, but no, this was just made in Photoshop. This isn't the real cover of an Israeli magazine. This is the real cover. In reality, instead of honoring the man who documented the crime, they honor the man who perpetrated the crime. Elor Azaria, that soldier, is named Man of the Year, according to Makor Rishon, Israeli newspaper. And of course, because he was filmed, there's no choice. Just for appearance sake, we got to put him on trial, right? So he comes to trial, and what does he say? Again, you're familiar with this, the cranberry defense. He says, in the past, people who committed crimes like this, it resulted in a mere rebuke, and thus the current charge amounts to discrimination. Again, everyone else is doing it, so why can't we? This happens all the time, and in the past when people did this, all they got was a little tut-tut, and that's it. Otherwise, they get away clean. So if you charge me and punish me, that's unfair to me, that's discriminatory against me. This is how it goes down. Now, as I said, we've come to the point where not someone, who shows great bravery in battle or something, but this guy who merely shot someone lying on the ground is considered an Israeli hero. And at least 63%, some polls show 68 or 69% of Jewish Israelis believe that although he was convicted in court, even though he was seen on camera doing so, even though his punishment was so small, only 1.5 years, 18 months, a mere 18 months of prison time is what he was sentenced to. 63 or more % of Jewish Israelis want him to be exonerated, want him to get off without any punishment, want him to be released and to receive amnesty. Now, he has become a folk hero in Israeli society, merely for executing a man. Okay? It's gotten to the point where recently in Israel, they've just now, after all these years, they've decided to institute a policy where if you're going to the grocery store and you need to have plastic bags, you have to pay for them because they're trying to discourage the use of plastic bags so they don't cause, it fills up landfills and such. So now you have to pay for plastic bags. Just started doing this. So now one of Israel's leading grocery chains, Rami Levi, started printing out these plastic bags, and they said, okay, we're supposed to charge you for them, but instead we're going to give them to you for free because we're going to print Elor Azaria's photo on them, and on it we write, the bag is free. Elor pays for us all. This is the messaging. Like he's Jesus or something. He died for our sins. Elor pays. Well, maybe that's why, top Israeli General Gadi Shamni just said this past year, we've elevated the occupation to an art form. We're the world champions of occupation. This is what it's come to. So let's take a minute to try to put this in perspective, because I've been giving you a barrage of facts and figures, and how can we make sense of this? We're constantly being told that there's two sides here, Israelis versus Palestinians, or some people would say Jews versus Arabs. It's one or the other. I would argue that it's not two sides, that it's actually four sides. Okay, and that's how provides us with a better lens to help understand what's going down. These four sides actually make up a four-sided pyramid, and they actually spell out the word side, so it's easy to remember, a mnemonic device here. Okay, and these are the four sides. We're talking about segregation, integration, domination, and elimination. S-I-D-E, side. I'll explain what I mean by that. Those who are advocating for segregation, they're talking about a two-state solution. They want the land to be divided up between Israel and Palestine, and never the twain shall meet, and that's one camp. The other camp, integration, they're talking about a one-state solution. All of mandatory Palestine, Israel, and all the territories should be one state in which Jews and Arabs have full equal rights. That's the one-state solution. Then there's domination. They see one apartheid state as their goal, where, yes, there's one state for all involved, but Jewish people have more rights than non-Jewish people. And, of course, then there's elimination, people who are calling for outright ethnic cleansing. It seems to me that we'll have a better understanding of what's going down if we frame it within the understanding that there's four sides, and these are those four sides. So where are we today? What policies are the Israeli government and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pursuing? Let's look at his quotes just from the last year alone. Know that there was and will not be a more sympathetic government towards settlement than this one. We need to control all the territory for this foreseeable future. We will forever live by the sword. Surround all of Israel with fences and barriers? Yes. We must defend ourselves against the wild beasts. And we see that it's not only about the Arabs outside of Israel. It's talking about also the Arabs inside Israel. So in the run-up to the elections, we have him discussing with one of his political rivals, you'll never get the Mizrahi vote, the Arab-Jewish vote. Only I know how to get it. I know who they hate. They hate the Arabs, the non-Jewish Arabs. And on the day of the election itself, if you can imagine this, when it, just for a moment, it wasn't clear, it seemed that perhaps he might not be re-elected, then he pulls out his insurance policy, so to speak, and he goes on to Facebook in a live video. He says, Arab voters are streaming in droves to the polling stations. We have only an emergency army call up. Defend Israel. He frames it in military terms. The fact that Arab citizens of Israel are merely voting, exercising their right to vote, is the problem. And he calls upon Israeli Jews to mound up. Like, this is war and you need to come to the front lines and vote. This is how he frames towards Arab citizens of Israel. Well, that's Netanyahu. But you see now that such a statement, and maybe in another political context, would have been easily understood as beyond the pale. But in Israel, it becomes a joke. It becomes a recurring joke. So you have the coalition chair, David Bitan. He says, I'd prefer the Arabs not to go to the polls in droves and not reach them altogether. Ha ha! So funny. This is the discourse in Israel. You can laugh about our racism. It's so funny to us. And Bitan, of course, he isn't only trying to get all the Arab people out of Israel. He wants also all the Jews who are in solidarity, who don't hate Arabs as much as he does. So recently we have Chagai Elad, the director of B'Tselem, Israel's oldest human rights organization, speaking to the United Nations. It's now been 50 years that Israel has occupied the West Bank. And so he speaks at the United Nations and explains, we need to put an end to this. Where's the international community? Blah, blah, blah. And for doing so, for speaking to the United Nations and criticizing the occupation, Bitan says about Chagai Elad, revoke the citizenship of B'Tselem's executive director. We must strip his citizenship. So this is the discourse in Israel towards even those liberal Jews. Now, again, this is the domination camp, right? What about the elimination camp? Those that want ethnic cleansing. Well, when we go to Shmuel Eliyahu, who's the chief rabbi of the city of Tzfat and the elimination camp's candidate for chief rabbi of Israel altogether, he says about B'Tselem, when one says, may the heretics intended towards breaking the silence in B'Tselem. What does this mean? Again, this is religious jargon. I have to parse it quickly. May the heretics. That's a prayer that Orthodox Jews repeat every morning. And the words of the prayer are, may the heretics and whistleblowers have no hope, and may all the evil people be destroyed instantly. So in other words, this chief rabbi on the public payroll, paid by my tax money, says that those folks, those liberal Jews who speak out against the occupation, who speak out in solidarity with the Palestinian people, should be killed. He's encouraging Israelis to kill them. This is the level of discourse in Israel. But it's not only the domination camp, and it's not only the elimination camp, if you can imagine, even the segregation camp. So after Chagai Elad spoke at the United Nations, an Israeli citizen came to the police and demanded that Chagai Elad be tried for treason, come up on charges of sedition. Who was this man? Not a far right-winger, but in fact a core member of the Labour Party, here taking a photo with the Labour Party leader, Bougie Herzog. So even the so-called centrists in Israel society think that those whistleblowers are treasonous, are traitors to the country. As I said, saying something racist doesn't get you put beyond the pale. It's actually part of the discourse. So recently on Israeli television, we have this commercial in which it was a riff off of Netanyahu's comment about them going to the polls in droves. So this is how they pictured it. Remember what Netanyahu said on election day? And there's a faux accent, right? We will defeat them. Now we are the majority because we are allowed to vote. Because Palestinians, because Arabs, citizens of Israel and citizens of Jerusalem can vote, because of that, they will become the leaders of here in this case, the mayor of Jerusalem. So now the mayor of Jerusalem is Arab, so his secretary is bringing him coffee and she has a hijab because she's Arab. So this is how they try to scare Israeli Jews with the prospect of Arabs merely exercising their franchise to vote. The mere right to vote. And who is conducting this campaign? Who's paying for it? Who's promoting it? None other than these former members of Knesset, all from the Labour Party. The so-called opposition, the so-called liberal Zionists, those who want the two-state solution, the segregationists. We should understand there's no such thing as separate but equal. You learned this already in America decades ago. They want separation, but there's no such thing as separate but equal. Now, even, yes, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak from the Labour Party, went on record this year saying that Israel has been infected by the seeds of fascism. And it's just the beginning, he says. Great. Glad you said something. But until just a few years ago, you were in Netanyahu's government. You were his defense minister. You were enforcing his policies. You were putting them into practice. And yes, recently Bougie Herzog, the current leader of the Labour Party, leader of the opposition, he also said that the legislation that the government is passing is indicative, more than anything, of the budding fascism creeping into Israeli society. Boker Tov, I'm glad you decided to say something, but until 5 minutes ago, you were begging Netanyahu to get into his government. You want to be his foreign minister. You want to do his hasbara. You want to explain away his apartheid to the world. So, what's his rhetoric? With Bibi and Bennett, we will remain stuck with the Palestinians forever. We have the ability to change the situation in the country, he says, without giving the impression that we're Arab lovers. We want to be elected, but is there a way we can get elected without giving off the vibe that we don't hate Arabs? We want that racist vote. We want the racist Jews to vote for us too. We don't want the racist Jews to only vote for Netanyahu. Let some of those racist Jews, those supremacist Jews vote for us. We don't want to give up this vibe that we don't hate Arabs. Let's kind of, make that, put that, sweep that under the rug so people get the impression that maybe we also hate Arabs just as much as the Likud. With regard to security, I am more extreme than Netanyahu. He wants to flank him on the right. This is the centrists in Israel. You need to understand, the Likud, the Labour, they're not so different, okay? So one of them, the Likud, wants to separate Jews and Arabs with legal means by making two different legal statuses. So the Labour Party wants to separate them by physical means, by putting them in separate territories. It's the same overriding racist ideology. And again, it's not only the Knesset, and it's coming home to roost. So those that say, oh, well, Bougie Herzog, the Labour Party, the Liberal Zionists, they just want to create an Arab state in the West Bank and a Jewish state in the rest of Israel, but that's not the situation because that racism comes home to roost. Moti Dotan, the regional governor of the Lower Galilee, he says that no Arabs can swim in their swimming pools in the Jewish towns and villages in the Galilee. He refuses to allow Palestinian people, citizens of Israel, to come and use his pools. Why? He says their culture of cleanliness isn't the same as ours. Until just a couple years ago, this man was a lifelong member of the Labour Party. This is the so-called liberal Zionist we hear about. They don't want Jews and Arabs in the same pool. And it's not only in the north of the country. You go down to why is that racist? Okay? And it's not just I should also point out, the Lower Galilee, these are their sister cities. These are their twin towns. Are these shared values with Atlanta, Detroit, St. Louis, Tulsa, and Great Neck? It's not only the north of the country. Go down to the south of the country, the city of Yerucham, and you find the same thing. They're public pools. They don't allow Arabs to swim in them. And again, we're talking about a city with sister city of Miami, Florida, and Highland Park, Illinois. I'd be curious to hear what their leaders have to say about this. And again, this is a member of the Labour Party. The mayor is a member of the Labour Party, the so-called liberal Zionists. So this is the Labour's racism coming back home to roost. It's not only about separating Jews and Palestinians in the West Bank, it's also about separating them even in so-called, Israel proper. And of course, with that kind of racism, is it any wonder that it continues, not just the north and the south, but also on the coastal plains? In the center of the country, in the town of Rishon LeZion, this city councilor wants to separate Jews and Arabs at the beach. He doesn't want Arabs coming to the same beaches as Jews, saying, the Arabs, they get enraged in a second, and for them, stabbings are no big deal. They have sentiments for no one. This is the kind of racism that we regularly read about on a daily basis in our news headlines. Somehow, they don't quite make it to CNN or NBC. Now, it's gotten to the point where the Knesset itself, some of you have seen these photos before. This is a picture of Israel's parliament, and this, in the backdrop behind the speaker's podium is a sculpture, a facade, created by an Israeli artist. It's very iconic. I'm sure some of you have seen this photo before. The artist who created that And just a few months ago, it's gotten to the point where he's so ashamed of Israeli political culture that he's asked for it to be taken down. He says, I'm ashamed that I made it, and I've asked a number of times that it be moved or covered with a tapestry. That's the point we're at now. Now, I just talked a little bit about the segregation camp, but the truth is that even that liberal Zionist racism that we see isn't enough for Israelis anymore. It's declining in popularity when you pair off the segregation candidate versus the domination candidate, Bougie versus Bibi, and we pair off Bennett versus Bibi, the elimination candidate, we find that more Israelis prefer the latter. They don't want their washed down racism, they want the real deal. So when they pair them off, Bougie only gets 25% of the vote to Netanyahu's 56%, but Bennett, the far right candidate, gets 29% to Bibi's 40%. All right? The elimination camp is growing in power in Israel. Who is this Naftali Bennett, the leader of the elimination camp in the Israeli parliament? Well, in the current government, he's the education minister. So what has he done in the time that he's been in power? Well, he says this year that studying Judaism and excelling in it is more important to me than studying math and sciences. Okay, but what does that entail? I mean, I thought Israel's supposed to be this, like high-tech, modern society that's striving for academic excellence, but okay, you're saying that Judaism is more important. But what does that mean? What is your Judaism to you? What Judaism are you trying to promote amongst Israeli youth? Well, let's look at what he's done since he's been in power in the last few years as education minister. So we go to the classroom in Tel Aviv suburb, and we see the photos on the wall, and we zoom into this photo, and I'm sure some of you have seen this iconic photo before. And this is the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall. It's considered to be the holiest place in the Jewish religion. Jewish people pray in the direction of Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem they pray in the direction of the Wailing Wall, and many people pray at the Wailing Wall every day. Is there anything you notice that's a little odd about this photo?
It's missing Al-Aqsa.
Exactly. It's missing. They've completely photoshopped out the Dome of the Rock.
Oh my God.
The Muslim shrine that is the most beautiful piece of architecture in the entire country. But it's an affront because it's a Muslim shrine and they want it gone. They want it gone from the picture and they want it gone from the Temple Mount itself. And so kids grow up and then now they're past pictures and now they're getting to the point where they can start to read a little bit. So, but it's a combination of pictures and words. So all the students are given, at some schools they're given these journals from the school, and the journals include this comic strip. And again, I've translated some of this into Hebrew to give you a sense of the kinds of messaging that Naftali Bennett wants his students to read. There's a conversation between two young men, one called Jack and one called Jacob, a non-Jewish man and a non-Jewish boy and a Jewish boy. So Jack starts off, "Look, we're the same. Well, I'm a Gentile and you're a Jew. There's no difference between us. Kumbaya, sounds great, right?" But now Jacob comes in. True, we look the same, we even have the same name, as Jack is Jacob. But we're not the same at all, because I have a Torah which guides me to live correctly. A person with Torah and a person without Torah are not the same at all, even if they outwardly appear so. So again, we're advancing beyond the age of comic books, and kids are starting to learn how to read, read real books without any pictures. And so the Ministry of Education has a list of books that they promote to young students to improve their reading skills. And among those books include these, which I've lifted these quotes from them. We're talking about the Arab Gentiles have no desire we have no desire to have them here among us. More holiness has to be brought into the state of Israel until we reach a Torah state, a total theocracy. These are the kinds of messages that he's promoting. This is what kids need. This is how they're learning how to read, right? How to improve their reading skills. So we get a little bit older, and kids start to go through puberty. They start to read novels. And this year we see the Israeli Education Ministry banning books. All right, we're actually at the stage where we're banning books. And they remove texts from recommended reading lists. Why? These two books were removed because in their plot lines they include romantic relationships between Jews and non-Jews. This first book was about a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman. This book was about a Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man. And that's such an affront to Bennett, who wants to end all miscegenation, so he banned these books. Okay, remove them from schools' reading lists. And then, when we finally get to the later stages of the mandatory education, because Judaism you learn from day one, from nursery, okay? Holocaust you learn about from nursery school. But civics, the idea of what civil rights are and what civic responsibilities are, that you don't get until your final years of high school, when you're practically out the door. So, of course, there is a civics textbook, ostensibly tries to inculcate among students an idea of what it means to be a good member of society. But this year, Bennett wanted to change what it means to be a member of society. And so he completely revamped the textbook. But he revamped it in such a way that the members of the committee were so disgusted with what he'd done that a whole bunch of them resigned en masse until he didn't have enough people on the committee to actually continue their work. People were so ashamed they didn't want their names associated with it, because in the new text that he's published, it frequently stresses the disadvantages of pluralism and the advantages of uniformity. This is the society he's trying to create. And he's doing so. And so this man, a director in the education department, in the education ministry rather, he was horrified, especially after the story of Mohammed Abu Khdeir. This is a young Palestinian teenager who a couple summers ago, he was kidnapped outside by a group of Israeli teens, kidnapped outside his home, beaten, dragged to a forest. They poured gasoline down his throat, and they lit him on fire from the inside out. They burned him to death from the inside out. Now, this was so traumatic, this man was so disgusted by it, he said, okay, we need to combat this phenomenon. There is so much racism in Israeli society, and certainly amongst the youth. We need to try to measure this and work against it and combat it. And so, he did his research and he created an entire program that would measure the racism amongst the youth and try to combat the racism amongst the youth. Once Bennett got word of it, he shut down the whole program and he fired him from his position. Gave him the heave-ho. And of course, once that happened, he said, things like this happened only in the Middle Ages or in totalitarian states. This was not lost on the Israeli state comptroller, who issued just a few months ago a report about racism in the education system. And what he had to say, he didn't mince any words. He said, I will not gloss over the state of affairs. It shows a grim picture. The state of Israel is doing very little to purge the severe phenomena of racism and hatred among youth. Worse than this, he writes, over years, the Ministry of Education has avoided taking the necessary steps for prevention of racism. So not only is it not doing anything to try to prevent racism, okay, but it's purposefully avoiding doing anything. It's not unconscious, it's conscious. They don't want to stop the racism, they want the racism to continue. It feeds into their efforts to ramp up nationalism so that they'll get more votes from the extreme right-wing power so that they can divert society into this eliminationist camp. Now, with the government not doing anything about it to stop racism, thankfully, some conscientious youth are realizing that we need to step up our game. They need to do something and take it into their own hands. And so this young Palestinian citizen of Israel, I should point out, I know she's light-skinned and blue eyes. Palestinians, like Jews, come in all shapes and flavors and sizes and colors too. In any case, this young Arab citizen of Israel, Valerie, she got together with a Jewish citizen and a young friend of hers who was Jewish, and the two of them together, they went on a workshop where they learned about racism and different communities and how to advance tolerance and how to combat, race hatred. And they put together a workshop for their fellow students. They thought, you come to my school, I come to your school, we'll do a conversation. We'll be able to at least do our small part to try to improve the situation on the ground. But when she wanted to come to the school to present what she'd put together, the principal at the school wouldn't even let her in the door. And when asked, she said, I don't want my students to be in communication with that sector. They wouldn't even let an Arab girl walk into the school. They don't want them to even speak to Arabs. This is a situation. Okay, now this is a map of the United States, the results of the last election. I'm sure you've seen this graph before. And as you know, of course, the blue states are those who voted for the Democratic candidate, the red states, those who voted for the Republican candidate. The Israeli illustrator, BRAVERMAN, he did a political cartoon of Israel. Of course, this is not accurate, this is his cartoon rendition, but he says, if we were to make a similar map of Israel, he wrote after, or he drew after the election, this is what it would look like. The entire state of Israel is a red state. It's only in and around the environs of Tel Aviv that there's any resistance to that message. Now, although, people of conscience maybe were, dismayed by this election result, if there was one thing that came out of that election result that maybe gave them a shred of hope, it was when you look at the results of voting amongst the youth, amongst the millennials, it was a completely different picture. This is the chart of how millennials voted in the most recent election, and you see exact opposite, even more so. An overwhelming majority of millennials voted not for the Republican candidate, but for the Democratic candidate. And so for anti-racists, this, at least shows a way out. Okay, we're in a slump. But in the years and the decades to come, as old people get older and young people grow into their shoes, hopefully we will see this become the direction that the country moves in, away from race hatred that we've heard from the Republican candidate and towards a more inclusive vision of society, with all the problems of the Democratic Party, too many to list here. But the idea is we would move away from the far-right vision of Donald Trump and other equally repugnant Republicans. So on one hand, this is a sense of hope that the youth are less racist than their parents, but in Israel it's just the opposite. The younger generation is more racist than their parents. So if this is what Israel looks like today, figuratively, then this is what it would look like in several years' time. This is what the youth would look like, and maybe it would look like this, or maybe it would look like that. Maybe they just kick them out altogether. Hard to say. Now, we can see this best amongst the actual children of the Israeli leadership. So Benjamin Netanyahu's son, Yair, he is described as the far right, much further to the right of Jewish home, the eliminationist party. He's further than Netanyahu, far further than Netanyahu, and of course, he is now entering politics in recent months. Even though he's in his mid-20s, he's now a candidate, or he's putting himself up as a candidate for the ruling Likud party. And we see also the previous Likud prime minister, Ariel Sharon, you remember him? Well, he's long gone, but his son, Gilad Sharon, has also just joined the Likud party. And among other quotes, we see where his vision lies. He says, we need to flatten all of Gaza. The Americans didn't stop with Hiroshima. They hit Nagasaki too. So we're now talking about genocide. This is where we're at. Of course, in Israel, in the eliminationist camp, we also have first-generation fascists, people who don't have that pedigree, but who are showing their mettle by, of course, this is Bezalel Smotrich. A few years ago, he was arrested for amassing large quantities of explosives. Not sure what he wanted to do with that, but quickly rehabilitated himself, worked his way up the ranks of the Jewish Home Party to the point where now he's a member of Knesset and, in fact, the deputy speaker of the Knesset. If you can imagine that. Now, this man, Bezalel Smotrich, every few years we see like a series of articles in Israeli newspapers. It's like we all of a sudden remember that another aspect of society is segregated. Another part of the country is there's Jews and Arabs are separated by race, or religion, and the most recent, and then of course we forget all about it, we do nothing about it, and then a few years later we remember it all over again. The most recent example of this was a few months ago. it was reported in Israeli newspapers that 6 different hospitals around the country were segregating maternity wards by race. Jewish women in one area, Arab women in another area, not in the same room and not in the same ward. Now, of course, this is such blatant racism that, many people were appalled by it, but not Bezalel Smotrich. Hells no. He was perfectly happy to defend it publicly. What he said was, my wife would not want to lie next to a baby that might murder her baby. Okay? This is where we're at. Might murder her baby. A baby will murder her baby. This is the kind of mentality. This is the kind of discourse. Now, Bezalel Smotrich, this talk about babies being culpable, this comes straight out of Torat HaMelech. I don't know if you're familiar with this book. I've spoken about it a few times. The King's Torah. This became a bestseller in Israel in 2010 when a rabbi wrote a theological treatise. He asked the question, under what circumstances is a Jew allowed to kill a non-Jew? Well, he came to the conclusion, after some deliberation, that in fact there is justification for killing babies if it is clear that they will grow up to harm us. This is the conclusion the book comes to. Now, it's not only words. There's actions. These things have an effect on society. People read this and they learn, okay, well, the rabbis say it's okay. That means I can go out and do it. And in fact, just in the last year and a half, we have Jewish Israelis going out and firebombing the home of a Palestinian family in the West Bank and killing a father, mother, and a 1-year-old baby. The government wasn't prepared to do anything about it. It's only because, again, a Palestinian legislator in the Israeli Knesset, he sued the government. He went to the Supreme Court demanding that the government do something about it and bring the perpetrators to justice. So finally, forced to do so by the judicial arm of the government, the Israeli government put them on trial. He found the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators, brought them to court. But there's no shame around it, okay? For those perpetrators, you would think that maybe there'd be some sense of shame, some being, doing some soul searching about it. No, the friends of those alleged firebombers, those alleged murderers of the Palestinian family, their friends come to the court and throw down gang signs. They're not talking about West Coast when they put up 3 fingers, okay? They're not trying to do a W. The 3 fingers that they throw up are for the 3 Palestinians that were murdered, the father, mother, and the baby. They were boasting about it. They were proud of it. They were showing off. They were saying, in your face, we got them, all 3. This is how their acts of sadistic violence are praised. And it's not only that one incident, it wasn't only in the courts. It was also in the wedding halls. In Jerusalem, you have wedding halls and settlers holding, celebrations for their friends and family who are joining in matrimony. And what do in their joyous celebrations? They hold up photos of that 1-year-old baby that they burned to death, and they take knives and they stab the picture. They hold pistols and they hold rifles and they hold what look like, what are supposed to be Molotov cocktails, like the one they used to burn that family, and they hold up the cocktails, and they hold up the pictures of Ali Dawabsha, and they dance, and they sing, and they praise Jah. And this is how they celebrate life. And who else is dancing at these weddings? Who else is celebrating at these Jerusalem wedding halls? I see this man, he's a very high-ranking officer in the Israeli army, and I see here he's dancing with this religious rabbi, and that they've switched hats. He put on his fedora, and this rabbi put on his army beret. Who are these people? Well, this man is no less than Rafi Peretz, then chief rabbi of the Israeli army. And who is this man? No less than Yitzchak Shapira, the very rabbi who authored that book, that Gentile murdering manual, Torat HaMelech. Here they are whipping it up at Yitzchak Shapira's kid's wedding. So, is this the message that you want to send to the Israeli society? That Gentile murdering manual authors should be celebrated and be respectable members of society? Yes, apparently so. There is justification for killing babies. Also this year, the largest concert hall in liberal Tel Aviv. Okay? The largest concert hall, the largest Jewish religious group in the world, Chabad, decides to hold a massive celebration there at the concert hall. And who do they get to be their guest speaker, their speaker of honor, but this man, Yitzhak Ginsburg. And who's he? The very rabbi who lent his religious authority to that book, Torah Temelech, who gave his hechsher, his stamp, his seal of approval, saying, yes, this follows all the rules of Judaism. This is a correct interpretation of Judaism. There is justification for killing babies. Babies. Of course, not everyone who wears a kippah is going to say that or think that or feel that. Yes, Elazar Stern, a centrist member of parliament, a religious man, he said, he sternly criticized that book, the King's Torah. He too was disgusted by it, okay? But when he had the courage to come out and say something, that he stood against it, well then this man, Rami Brachiahu, said, you should go to jail, you should be charged, you should be convicted, you should be punished for daring to criticize the King's Torah. And so what happened to Rami Brachiahu? Did he become persona non grata? Was he shamed out of public office? No, just the opposite. After he made those comments, he was made chief rabbi of the Israeli police. Chief rabbi of the army, chief rabbi of the police, and we continue now to the chief rabbi of Israel itself, of the state, Yitzhak Yosef, who earlier last year said, according to Jewish law, it is forbidden for a non-Jew to live in the land of Israel. These are the religious leaders of the country. The eliminationist camp is in charge. And it's not that they're detached from reality. In the last year, several polls were conducted, and this is what the results were. 48% of Israeli Jews say Arabs should be transferred or expelled from Israel. 79% say Israel should give preferential treatment to Jews. I'm using the exact words of the poll so you don't think that I'm taking them out of context or misquoting them. 53% of Israeli Jews say the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that's what they want to support. Okay? And 19% of Jewish Israelis say that Palestinians and Israelis should be citizens of the same state and enjoy equal rights. So what does this mean? What are the results of these polls? When we put them one against the other, we see that 48% support the eliminationist view, 79% support the domination view, 53% the segregation, and only 19% support an integration view. What does this tell us? It tells us that even if we manage to topple Netanyahu from power, even if we succeed in taking him down, it's not enough. Because waiting in the wings are other people who have equally racist, if not more racist ideologies, just waiting to implement them. It's not enough to stand in opposition to Netanyahu. A true anti-racist front would have to stand in opposition to Netanyahu, to Bibi and Bennett and Bougie. Now, who is that person going to be? Who are going to be the folks who stand in opposition, who present an anti-racist front? Is it going to be the current Palestinian leadership in the Israeli Knesset? Are going to be another group of people? Or I can't say. Okay? But I want to leave you with one last thought to take you out, just so that I don't leave you completely devastated and destroyed, and just some small sense of hope. This one story. This man, Reuven Hammer, he's a Jewish American man born here in the United States, spent the first half of his life here. Then he moved to Israel, where he spent the last few decades. And Reuven was disgusted, just like you and me, by the racist remarks of Israel's chief rabbi. He was thoroughly repulsed by the book, the King's Torah, and the fact that some Israeli Jews went ahead and put it into practice and burned these babies. Okay? Yes, he said enough is enough. And this man, he's one of the leading rabbis of the conservative movement of Judaism, one of the largest movements in Judaism in the United States. And he decided to write a religious responsa. And he convinced all of his fellow conservative rabbis on the board of rabbis that adjudicate matters of Jewish religious law. And he convinced them, they all signed off on it. It was voted unanimously to approve. And what they did was they said all the laws of Judaism that are racist, we are canceling them. We are making them null and void. From now on, forevermore, the laws that existed that were based on racism no longer exist, no longer apply. In his words, quoting from the Psak Din, there are passages that talking about the Jewish religious texts, there are passages that depict Gentiles as inferior to Jews and sometimes even as less than human. Many of these can be explained as reactions to cruel treatment of Jews by non-Jews. Okay, we can understand some of them with the historical context of the persecution that Jews went through, that some of them would be so angry as to write racist remarks after the fact. But some, however, go far beyond that. And therefore, we reject the ideas found in Jewish writings that consider Jews to be inherently superior to Gentiles. These concepts shouldn't be considered part of accepted Jewish belief. Not for us and not for any other Jew. If you believe that, you shouldn't be allowed to call yourself a Jew, they say. And let's break it down into specifics. He says, it is forbidden to murder, rob, cheat, deceive, or otherwise harm a non-Jew. A strong statement against the elimination camp. But that's not enough. Also, all rules discriminating against Gentiles are no longer authoritative. They are intrinsically immoral. A strong stand against the domination camp. And then he goes even further. Laws intended to keep Jews from contact with idolaters are no longer valid. A strong statement against the segregation camp. All of those three racist ideologies, a strong statement against all of them. And that's what we need to see more of. If this man can find the courage in his life, in his world, to get together his colleagues, his peers, and speak out against this racism, then why can't we? Why can't every one of us? I'm not asking everyone to become a Superman. I'm not asking people to go above and beyond, but I think that in every one of our lives, there's a way that we can take a stand, a strong stand against racism in all of its myriad of forms. I don't think we have a choice at this point. We're at the point where it's do or die. It's a stand against racism or a stand for racism. And I hope that we will find the strength of this man and other men like him, like Reuven Hammer, who are taking that stand against racism in our own lives and in the lives of our friends and families. That's it for today.